everyone. This is Kathy Mason from MasonWorks Marketing here on Conscious Business Zone with my new friend, Diva Money. Diva Money? I want that last name too. So I got to meet Diva just on Sunday. So this was really, thank you very much for showing up so quickly. But I was so impressed with her. She's a spiritual leader at the Unity of Longmont Spiritual Center, and it's a part of Unity Worldwide Ministries. And she's also an ordained minister. She's studied mindfulness in the what do you call that? In the lineage tradition of Thich Nhat Hahn, who I've read every one of his books. I just loved him. She's a transformational coach, an artist, an author, and she teaches classes about highly sensitive people. And she's been doing the classes on Zoom as well. Originally, she was doing them in person, but she's modified. So I thought it was so destined for us to do this today so that people could learn about highly sensitive people and the gift of it, not the difficulty of it. And I consider myself a highly sensitive person too. So that said, welcome.
Thank you. And a reminder, my name is Dava.
Did I say it wrong?
You said Diva, which sound like an invitation to be one, but
oh, sorry, Dava. I'm sorry. I practiced.
No worries. I'm Dava Money, and I was named after my father, David. And I think Ava Gardner was popular at the time in 1950. So there you go.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about being a human and being a spiritual being, having a human experience. And especially with the focus on highly sensitive persons, which I think our world needs very much right now because of the gifts of being highly sensitive. So shall I just jump in there, Kathy?
Yes, please.
Great. I am aware that our life is magnificent, beautiful, artful, and at times really painful. There's suffering. And I think as a human being, we cannot escape suffering. So it's important to figure out how to navigate life, how to minimize suffering, how to heal from old suffering, old wounds. One of my earliest memories is in 1955, when I was 5 years old. My mother was diagnosed with lupus. Nobody knew what lupus was in 1955. And I watched her suffer her entire life with that. And at some point, she was also diagnosed as having schizophrenia, which a neurologist said was a result of the lupus affecting her brain. And one of her biggest coping mechanisms was alcohol. So she became an alcoholic. And that was hard as a child to watch this mother go through such suffering and to feel helpless, to not be able to do anything about it. And so I was drawn to figure out how to help. And, you go through this ego piece of, I can make it better. And then with experience, I've learned, of course, I can't make it better. However, I think I can teach skills and perspectives and beliefs that the person can then make their lives better.
Right.
So I see suffering as mainly two kinds. One is the ongoing suffering from previous wounds. And those wounds can be from grief, from loss, from trauma, from deep disappointment, all kinds of things. And a wound takes place when an experience in the moment is so intense, we can't allow ourselves to fully experience it and integrate it. So some part of us splits off. And then, because we're carrying around this wound, something in our life can be a trigger. And we often think of those triggers as being something we want to avoid. What I'd like to suggest is that those triggers are an invitation to heal. That when we begin to identify when we're triggered, what is doing the triggering, then we can identify the wound and heal from that, become more whole, because parts of ourselves come back. And when they come back, they always come back with more energy and often with some kind of gift. The other suffering is in the moment. It may not be at all attached to a wound, but it's just something really hard. It's something really hard, like 9/11, 2001, when we all experienced suffering. It's something personal when we experience suffering going through a divorce, the loss of a child, all kinds of things, the loss of a job. And so I have kind of two ways of dealing with those two types of suffering. The suffering in the moment, not related to a wound, I've developed a process of identifying what's going on in our mind and in our body and working with that. And much of our healing and much of our management of suffering in the moment leads to what I think is both a human and a spiritual gift of intuition. And the more that our intuition develops, the easier it is to navigate life, because I do believe that as spiritual beings having a human experience, we have guidance. We have guidance from all that is, from the energies of the cosmos and whatever is beyond that. And people name that all kinds of things. They may name it God, they may name it spirit or universe. The more we work on ourselves, the more presence we have, and the more presence we are aware of around us. And it's the same presence. In unity, we believe we are fully human and fully divine. And in order to, I think, have the best experience here, the deepest, most rich experience here, we need not only just to attend to the spiritual aspect, but to the human aspect. And we do that by attending to our intuition, attending to our suffering, attending to our callings, using our gifts, sharing our heart and our compassion with other people. This world is really suffering right now. There's a lot of divisiveness, there's a lot of hurt and pain and blame. And I think that one of the greatest gifts we can bring to it is kindness.
Mhm.
Being kind, being compassionate. And the kindness can be something very small, opening a door, returning a grocery cart for someone, just nodding on a walk in the park. And we've also, because of the pandemic, really had a lot of isolation. And when we are isolated, we have a tendency to decline physically, mentally, and maybe spiritually. So I'm been very, very drawn to work with highly sensitive persons, which I consider myself to be, even before the pandemic, but especially now. So I've been developing classes and collecting different skills to allow us to reset our central nervous system. When there is something that is disturbing, our sympathetic nervous system gets really wonky. It's acting up in order to tell us that we're in danger and that we need to either fight, flee, freeze, or fawn. And fawn is a fairly new addition to that list. And fawning means becoming people pleasing, trying to get whoever we think is causing the harm to treat us better. So all of that is perfectly great and wonderful and useful in an emergency. However, our bodies our central nervous system is responding to events that are not an emergency any longer. And so if we stay in that state of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, we are releasing a lot of cortisol. Our whole bodies are a bit awry, and that can do damage. So I think that one of the things we can learn to do is really be aware of what's going on within ourselves and in the world. That is something that highly sensitive persons are really good at, because our brains work slightly differently. We're about 20%, maybe as much as 30% of the population. And there are parts of our brain that are activated all the time. We're always scanning the internal environment. We're always scanning the external environment. And that can be a gift so that we catch ourselves more quickly going into that state of urgency and emergency. And when we do, we can reset our central nervous system. We can activate the parasympathetic nervous system through the vagus nerve. So with simple practices like, if you want to join me in this one, taking a breath, that slows everything down. We pause.
Yes.
Taking a breath. And what we've learned is that if we make our exhalation longer than our inhalation, that stimulates the vagus nerve to shift us over to the parasympathetic nervous system. So let's take a nice breath and make the exhalation longer. It doesn't need to be exaggerated. It can be done anywhere at any time. There's another breathing practice that is called calm and collect. And it is breathing into the count of 4, holding to the count of 7, and exhaling to the count of 8. So let's try that. So 4, 7, 8. So when we learn different practices, and some of these are thousands of years old and have been used by many people, then we are able to navigate through life with greater calm, with greater ease and grace. And as we work on ourselves, our consciousness shifts. One of the goals of unity is to raise our consciousness, and we do that through prayer and meditation. And meditation can be very simple. It can just be simply pausing and noticing your environment, noticing the color red for just a moment, noticing our breath, noticing anything else going on in our body, and then going on about our day. Meditation can also be simplified by using counting our breath, the breath in, the breath out, the breath in, the breath out, or using a mantra. And a mantra is something that helps calm you. So an example that I've been using recently is just something as simple as I am safe. And I use that mantra throughout the day. And after some practice, I'm really believing I am safe. And the evidence shows I am safe in that moment. It may be something more spiritual, such as I and God are one, or I am one, I am blessed. So a mantra, in my experience, works best if you use I something or other. We all develop core beliefs about ourselves, oftentimes very, very early in our lives. And most of those are at a less than conscious level. And some of those are things like, I'm not real smart. I am flawed in some way. I can't do it. They're always about ourselves. and often about the world. So I am not smart enough to live in this world well. I am destined to be poor. Again, these beliefs are developed so early in life that we don't have an awareness of them, but we can become aware of them. And that's part of what I teach too. How do we get aware of those beliefs and recognize that those core beliefs determine our actions, our behavior, and then our behavior in the world is met with some kind of energetic match. So if I think that I'm not worthy, and then I go to a gathering, and because I don't feel like I'm worthy, I hold back and I'm not interacting, people aren't paying any attention to me, then I think I have evidence that that is true. And so we keep building that belief. Once we can identify that belief and then begin to shift it to, I am worthy, and we practice that enough and we look for evidence of that, our lives change.
Yes.
So I go to that gathering, same people, same place, and I feel like I am worthy. I have a conversation with someone. I learn about me, I learn about them. That's evidence. I've found evidence that I'm worthy. So some of these processes can be taught. And then they start to minimize our suffering, in addition to our being able to tune into ourselves and pick up on the suffering more quickly. All of these practices lead to presence. And I just invite you for a moment, think that word, say that word, presence.
Yes.
Isn't there something so precious about that?
Mhm.
I think that is what the world is. I think that's what we may call God, um, is that energy, that presence. And we all have different experiences of that. And that our experiences of that teach us part of who we are. I think that's what we're here to do as a spiritual being having a human experience, learn who we are. And as we learn who we are, we continue to grow, to develop, and to transform. I really appreciate the work and the personality of Richard Rohr. He is a monk, a Catholic monk, very liberal, very forward thinking, and he's written a great deal. My favorite piece of his is Universal Christ. And one of the things he says in that book and in his talks is that God uses love and suffering for our own transformation. Isn't that a kind of restful
Beautiful.
thought?
Yes. Well,
Yeah.
well, it's reframing. Everything you're talking about is reframing in my words. You're a poet and I am not. So your words are going to have a different elegance to them. But I really have been reframing and hope that most of the listeners will reframe that everything is happening for them, not to them. The
Yes.
victimization model, where it's like, oh, that happened again, I knew it, that what you're talking about is um, that framing that we may have from childhood that really could be thrown in the trash at this point. But instead, you become an observer and be delighted and excited about the gifts that might be available for you. Um, I went to a party on Sunday and I only knew maybe 5 people, maybe 6 people. There are 30 some people there, and I found myself just sitting there, sitting on a couch watching people, and just being delighted. It was sort of like, well, that's me. and that's me. And that's me. And there were most of them were quite a bit younger than me, and so it was fascinating. But I didn't have a story. I wasn't afraid to go. In as this highly sensitive person, sometimes you're afraid to go, or you don't have clear boundaries when walking through that door because you have such expectations of engagement and giving of yourself. You a lot of times you give. Your boundaries are kind of not so clear, and I'd love you to talk about boundaries if you could, because honestly, I saw my friend who took your highly sensitive person class, and we're very similar, and I saw she has boundaries now, and she didn't know you. Whatever you taught in that class was remarkable, remarkable, because we're not spring chickens for us to be able to change our attitude and our perspective of reality. It's powerful. So could you talk about boundaries, because I'm sure a lot of the people that are highly sensitive are going to Christmas parties, they'll be going to New Year's parties, they're in family gatherings, or they're doing the office where they might have been remote and now they get to be together, and there's a lot of stories that keep you from being present that are running. Could you talk a little bit about that for us?
Oh, of course. You mentioned a lot of things, so I'm going to focus on the boundaries first.
Okay.
Um, if we grow up and everything is absolutely perfect, we will know how to establish boundaries because we will get angry when we feel invaded. And so that anger will drive us to establish a boundary. And we can do that nastily or we can do that kindly. Um, and especially if we grow up really highly sensitive and we may be the only highly sensitive person in our family and not well understood for that reason, then what we may do is suppress anger in order to feel safe, in order to get along with family members, with schoolmates, with potential mates. And so when we suppress that, then we will allow people to take advantage of us. One of those forms of taking advantage of us is that we're so empathic that we know what somebody feels emotionally, often before they do.
Yep.
And what we may do until we become more aware of it is absorb that emotion, take that emotion on. That does not ultimately serve us or them because emotions are our own GPS system and they need theirs in order to learn how to navigate their lives. So we will take that on and energetically it changes us. So imagine for a moment that someone is extremely depressed. They can hardly get up to brush their teeth or fix breakfast in the morning. We spend time with them out of our empathy and our compassion and our desire to help. And we leave that home then like this.
Mm-hmm.
So part of what we need to do is even begin to identify what are we taking on. And since we have the ability to be aware in each moment, especially with practice, we can be aware of taking something on and asking ourselves a simple question of, is this mine? And what I experience as soon as I say, is this mine? And it's not, it lifts, it leaves.
Okay.
If it is mine, then I've got some work to do. One of the things that a student mentioned in the class was she's having to develop boundaries with herself. And I thought that was just brilliant. So it goes back to that, am I willing to take this on? No, I'm going to establish a boundary for myself. I'm not going to take it on. We often have this perhaps minimized or invisible savior. I want to help somebody. I want to take care of them. And we need to be mindful of that, not to go to extremes. Um, we have sometimes relationships that are not serving us, that is with somebody that will just take advantage of us over and over again. Can you do this? Will you do that? Will you give me a ride? Blah, 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 blah. And we may need to, as hard as it is, distance ourselves from that relationship as a means of um, taking care of our own energy, taking care of our own mind and body, etc. So, part of what I suggest is establish boundaries in small ways, get used to doing them. Somebody calls and says, "Can you do such and such?" And we have this kind of feeling inside of, "No, I don't want to do that." Pay attention to that and say, "I'm not available. No, I'm unable to do that. I'm not going to do that." Do it in small little places. Go into the grocery store and somebody asks you to try the sample of the food and it's not something you want. Just say, "No, thank you." So the biggest word of a boundary is no. Just practice saying no. And then when we do, our yes has so much more meaning. So it's very helpful in class. What we do is um, I give some education, but a lot of the class is discussion between everyone, and people learn from each other. So they'll share an experience they recently had and how they're trying to establish a boundary and get support of ways to do that and ways to do it kindly.
So,
Yeah.
so I have a question about that, because when you're in service to others, that seems to be the cloudy area where you want to be kind to them and kind to yourself, but somehow their need a lot of times is more important than your own. So,
Yeah.
and you're in service. I mean, this is what you've done most of your adult life. How do you figure out when it's how do you get the balance of being in service to yourself, basically?
Well, the first thing that I would do, Kathy, is examine that belief that their need is more important than ours,
Okay.
more important than our own. And unless they're having a heart attack and you got to call 911, or they're in a burning car, or someone is getting ready to harm them, much of the time their need isn't more important than ours. And
Right.
one thing to think about is, as human beings, we only have so much energy, so much time, so many resources internally. And if we keep feeding that to others, then we don't have it for ourselves. So I loved it back in counseling a few decades ago when we would all say, "Put your own oxygen mask on first before you even attend to your child." Because if you run out of oxygen,
Perfect.
what's going to happen to that child? What's going to happen to the people that you know and love? So I think that that piece of their need is more important than mine may go back to really early core beliefs. And some of those may be, if you have a suffering mom when you're a little kid, your safety may depend on meeting her needs first.
I see. Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the other thing that you mentioned that I relate to is the the skill of expressing anger, which I did not learn.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, and as a highly sensitive person, I would just watch black and white movies and cry. Somehow you release the emotion, but it's not in an angry way, because the consequences. I remember my dad say, "Think before you speak."
Mm-hmm.
It's like if
Mm-hmm.
only everyone else did that. But in my family, that is, because there was some bipolar stuff in my family.
Right,
So,
right.
and I was
Everybody's
affected with,
on edge, on eggshells.
right.
Yeah,
Well, when you're highly sensitive, I think that's part of the reason I can do some of the alchemic work and the energy work is that I learned how to either get out of my body really quickly or I learned to read the field. But that's not a way to be peaceful and loving into yourself and to be present.
yeah.
But could you talk about positively releasing anger? I mean, some people, what, they punch a pillow, they go scream at the toilet. Is there a way that you could suggest to positively release anger?
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to change the language a little bit and say
Okay.
positively use anger.
Oh, okay.
Okay. First of all, I want to notice that when you were talking about this, you were going like this. And it reminded me that we are not just confined to our bodies, we have an energy field that is ours around us.
Right.
So as we become more sensitive to that, one of the boundaries we can use is bring our energy field in and up. We don't need to shrink it. That we
Good.
may do that, but that's even painful. But what we can do is become aware when we feel like we're imposed. Imagine being at the airport. It's crazy, right? Lots of people, lots of noise, etc. Bring our energy field up into more of a pillar rather than an expansive piece. I said use anger because, again, our emotions have a purpose. They are telling us something. And so, one of the things that we can learn to do is to notice that anger in our body. And it often comes from the gut or from the solar plexus. And if we can, if it's safe to do this, we take a breath.
That's a long breath. You love the internet. Well, while we're waiting for her internet to come back, I want to show these beautiful cards. Oh, there you are.
Hi. Yeah, those are my authenticity oracle deck.
Yes, you're an amazing artist. You can
Thank
see
you.
the art behind you. You were frozen, so I thought I'd just show. And this was the card that I pulled. It was, how are your prayers answered? Are you truly asking for what you want? Pray incessantly. Design your own mantra and repeat it frequently. So it's beautiful.
Thank you. How I use that deck is that I suggest someone ask a personal question and then draw a card. And the purpose of the deck is to help develop your intuition, help you connect with it. So I hope that that card met your question.
Yes, of course. So we were talking about reusing anger, and you started to have us do a breath, and it was a very long breath.
Because of the freeze.
That's right. So do
So
you want to try again?
the internet set a boundary, right?
Or
Yeah,
our angels and guides are having fun with us. That's all.
absolutely. Don't take anything personally. So, yeah, so when we notice any kind of emotion, it's helpful to slow down, to pause, maybe take a breath, and then notice that. Focus on that emotion in the body, focus on the sensation of it. And then what happens is by focusing, because that's what it wants is attention, it may shift. There may be another sensation in our body. Then we shift to that sensation. Keep following the sensations until either they are not there or the sensation seems frozen, as the internet did. And then take a breath and ask that sensation, what do you want me to know?
Oh,
because there's information in there. So going back to the anger piece, let's say you've got all of a sudden a tense stomach, and you're able to pause and you're able to maybe even put your hand on that sensation and it doesn't shift. And so you say, what do you want me to know? And then you may have the intuition, and it can come to you in a sense, in words, in images, whatever way you work. And it will come up and say, this person is encroaching into my personal space. They're asking too much. They're demanding something. The information will come up. And then what do we do with that information? They're encroaching in our personal space. Excuse me, step out, step away. There's nothing wrong with stepping away. Even if, say, you're in a very chaotic environment, because highly sensitive persons are very sensitive to all the noises, all the lights, all the movement, everything. If that starts to feel overwhelming, go outside for a moment, take a breath, go to the restroom, whatever you need to do to have more control over your environment. So paying attention to that sensation, to that emotion is so powerful. So another example is you hear some information and all of a sudden there's a weight on your chest or whatever it is. We may all be individual in this. And you take a pause and that feeling doesn't leave when you focus on it and you say, what do you want me to know? I'm really sad because what they're describing is the health of a friend of mine is declining. What do we do with that? Well, maybe we grieve. Grief is such a powerful experience. It's not just feelings. Grief affects our entire body. Imagine losing a loved one, because we all do at some time. Our brain chemicals, the way our brain functions, changes. Our body changes, some things slow down, some things speed up. Our identity of who we are changes, so that there's the me before that death, when I had that relationship. There's the me after that death, when I no longer have that human relationship. And the thing that I think is especially critical to know about grief is that it's a natural response to a loss. So it can be the loss of a job, it can be the loss of a home, the loss of money, the loss of a person. And it's important to know we don't get over grief, we don't get through grief. We are transformed by it and we carry it. So I'm sure everyone can remember the death of a parent, the death of a child, or a best friend, or a spouse, whoever. And when you just think of their name, you have this sense, you have this knowing that you're carrying something through your life. And to me, a part of that is honoring that person, honoring that relationship. We can learn to be strong in the carrying of that. And it takes as long as it takes. So I started talking about grief as acknowledging a sensation in our body and then asking what it means, what we need to know, and it's telling us about a loss. So going back to anger, a very important job of anger is to tell us that our boundaries need to be adjusted. And if we have someone in our life that will not respect our boundaries after setting them time and time again, they're not serving us in our life. The other thing I want to go back to is, as highly sensitive persons, and we see somebody suffering, we feel somebody suffering, we want to relieve them of their suffering.
Right.
It may be important to understand their suffering is there for their own benefit. As hard as it is to see that, as hard as it is for them to work with it. And so, again, early on in our conversation, I mentioned that when I was little, I wanted to make everything better for my mother or anyone else who was suffering. But I learned that it's more important that the person figure out how to, and we can support them in that. Something as simple as, you've got this. I know it is hard as hell. I trust that you've got this. I see that potential in you. And listening. Listening is such a great gift we can give anyone. As an HSP, we need to learn how to listen without taking it on.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So in Unity, we look at, we all have human consciousness. And part of our task here is to raise that consciousness because the goal is Christ consciousness. And that's the consciousness that Jesus operated under, as he healed people, as he taught people, as he navigated through his own life. He was able to do so with love, with loving everyone, even the tax collectors whose tables he threw over, you know? And so I think that's part of our journey here, part of our purpose here is learn to do that. I'm not saying it's easy. It takes a lot of practice. And so when we have moments of that Christ consciousness, we can see their suffering as serving them. We can support them. I think that's a lot of grace and a gift.
Perfect.
So,
Perfect. Well, so I want to ask because I met you at the IANS, which is the International Association for Near Death Studies. So I know that you are experienced in multidimensional thinking. So, do you, because of your background with Buddhism, mindfulness, and Christianity, and the indigenous studies, and because of your heritage, do you do you rely on angels or the unseen ones at all for your direction as a highly sensitive person? Do you read the field and then respond? And how could we share a little bit of how to do that with the audience?
well, the how to is to continue to develop intuition. And that's from being present in the moment. And again, meditation can be very helpful with that. So being present to the moment, aware of what's going on inside and externally, you begin to realize there's not a lot of difference between the inner and the outer
Right.
because each is affecting the other. It's all energy. And so one of my earliest memories is being of a child in a um, violent household and having a sense of a being kind of right here.
Yep.
And having a sense that that being was there to protect me somehow, to be a companion somehow. And I don't have an awareness of that all the time. What has shifted or morphed is I have much more of an awareness of the field. So the way I have my own experiences is often um, I will hear something in my head, like, go to Michael's. And this was an experience where I was tired and I didn't want to go to Michael's. And I kept saying, no, 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 go to Michael's, go to Michael's. Well, a friend asked me the other day, is that my voice or what voice is it? And I realized it's actually not a voice. It's an impulse. It's an energetic pull or push. What I do is interpret it with words.
Right.
And so each time that I have followed that guidance, it has turned out to be a magical experience. And I think the more times that we pay attention to that and actually follow the guidance, the more often it happens. Um, so a lot of times my guidance will actually be to put me in a situation or a place where perhaps I can either be of service or I learn something that's important. Um, this is kind of a silly one, but when I was developing the Authenticity series, a series of 11 spiritual classes with my deceased partner, she learned from a coaching network and a keto move that we use in the class. It's called the 8 Flow. And she learned it from this man, Stuart Heller. And I kept asking her, will you please contact him and see if it's okay that we use it? Because we were using it. And she was very busy. So we ended up going on a Thanksgiving trip toward Prospect, toward New York to visit my daughter. And we stopped at one of those crazy travel places with all the McDonald's and all the, crazy, chaotic, busy place. We're eating and we look up and Stuart Heller and his wife walk in. So we were able to get permission. He said, yeah, use it, use it, use it. So that's just a kind of simple, not as profound as some of the other experiences, but we were paying attention. We'd put out a request in this energetic universe and the request was answered.
That's great.
Yeah, yeah.
That's great.
I had another experience I'll share very quickly. And I shared this with you on Saturday. I had a son, Joshua, that was born in 1974, and he lived just 3 days. And as you can imagine, it was just a heartbreak. And again, not something you get over, but something you carry. And about 24, 25 years later, I was facilitating a women's spiritual retreat in Virginia. And we were in the closing circle. It was sacred. It was very precious moment. And I look up and I see this kind of sheer image of a young man and a grown up young man. And I had this knowing that that was Joshua and that in some ways it was a goodbye because he'd been with me, with our family all those years. And he still is in essence, but it was sort of like he was done with his job and he was saying goodbye. And the thing that I really treasured was I shared that with that group of 16 women, and nobody said, oh, you're crazy.
Right.
Yeah, they all were spiritual women. They'd known me from doing these retreats, etc. And so that was such a wonderful treasure to be able to share that. So I think it's important that we find communities, we find friends, family that know us, the mystic, the modern mystic of us, and support that and celebrate it.
Right. I think that's the gift of being highly sensitive is the awareness of the field as well as your own possibilities in it, because the other part of this is whatever you resist persists. So where you might have a sadness or the grief impulse that comes through, and to rather than just push it away, it won't take that long to process it, and then it's done. So
Yeah,
it frees up a lot of energy, creative energy, to do something worthwhile with, right?
absolutely. Well said. Absolutely. And the same is true again of going back to those wounds that I was talking about that we carry around. As we address those and heal them through love, we get that creative energy.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
Well, I think that's been the theme, at least of this year. It appears that a lot of people are pressure cooker. They're in a pressure cooker, and it's been okay. I can deal with this for a little while. I can deal with this for 6 months, but it's just been a long time now where there isn't the same old normal. We're not back to normal. We never were intended, I don't believe, to be at that normal, because our past world wasn't kind, and
Mm.
this new world hopefully will be. So I'm hoping that the people that are highly sensitive number one, give themselves a gift of process time. Not hiding, not necessarily having to go hide, which I've done. I've tried that too.
Right.
Because sometimes you just can't be in the public. There's too much, and you go out of your body. You can't stay embodied a lot. And I don't know who decides that. You must decide. Oops, I'm out. But I think this is a time to be embodied and to process when you see it. I know yesterday there was a lot of sadness in the field, in global consciousness. And I don't know if you felt it, but it was, I just cried. I just let myself cry because it seemed like it was grief about the loss of the dreams. That's what I don't know if it was mine. That part was mine, but that's what it, so just to cry it out, it doesn't last very long. If you repress it, it lasts forever. You can carry it around like a steamer trunk with you versus a carry-on, right? But
Absolutely.
right. So the processing, you're saying breathe it, feel it, follow it if it's in your body where you can sense it, and then ask it what it wants you to know. Is there because you've done so many cultures, I'm just fascinated with how they all fit together with this work, because I love the indigenous teaching. I do not feel like I have studied it that much, and I don't have the heritage. But I've studied a lot of the Buddhist, a lot of the spiritual Hindu, a lot of Christianity and Judaism. I've studied a lot of it, and it just seems like all of that is coming, it's becoming useful now. The path to spiritually being a human is and embodying the spirituality in this human vessel. I think that's what I'm seeing is the big change we're going through. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Do you know the practice of Tonglen?
I've heard of it, but no, I don't know it.
It's a Buddhist practice, and Pema Chodron does a lot of teaching
Uh-huh.
in it. And it is being willing to take in that weight, that suffering that you were feeling and experiencing, to take that in through breath and transmute it in our human body. So it requires the belief that we can do that, that we can shift it to a lighter energy, that we can actually change that energy, transmute it. So it's breathing that in without owning it, without absorbing it molecularly, transmuting it, and then exhaling it as kindness, as love, as something lighter and more useful to our world. And I have a sense of gratitude that there are people that are doing that in the world every day.
Yes.
There are also people that live in monasteries or convents that are praying every day. And I do think that all of those practices are shifting our world energetically.
Right.
I also think there's a great power to intention. So even if all of a sudden we're overwhelmed by that weight of the world, if we could set an intention of, I'm not taking that on, I am free of that. In fact, avoid the word not, because the unconscious doesn't know
Right.
negative language. But I am free of that. And I pray that it lifts. I trust that it will, whatever an intention is that comes to you. And it's all energy. So that's going to have a shift, at least in the room in which you're in.
That's great.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate that. My process is to cry.
Yeah,
That's how I get through anger. Anger, I usually don't get angry. I get sad. I process it through crying. And what that was yesterday, it felt like loss. It felt like
yeah,
grief. And I tried to figure out if it was mine or the global consciousness, and I think it was both. I think I cleaned house in my little part of the field. Who knows? But yeah, it was just within 10 minutes it was done, and everything seemed more spacious. So I'm hoping that um, obviously the way that you're talking about doing it would allow you to be in public.
yeah.
Versus I had to be home doing that.
Well, I have a couple thoughts about that, Kathy. One is that may be a transmutation.
Yeah, I think it
Um,
was.
One of the things we know is that tears include neurotransmitters from the brain that are associated with depression and sadness, etc. So there's a release
Yeah,
chemically.
yeah,
The other thing is that all of us live in different cultures and we're impacted by our family beliefs, our community beliefs, our cultural beliefs, and the collective unconscious. And so in my lifetime, there have been really pretty strict gender behavioral rules.
right.
So females were not to be angry, males were not to express sadness. And those are very limiting beliefs and limiting practices. We have a range of emotions, and if you think about emotions as a color palette, if we mute any of them, the whole palette gets muted. So we may all have a natural tendency that has nothing to do with culture toward expressing sadness rather than anger. I think it's helpful, though, to ask, is this all that wants to come forward from me, or is there something else? Because
Perfect.
the more that we allow appropriately the expression of our feelings, the bigger our presence.
Oh, I love what you're saying, and I hope I can. I don't know that I can schedule this class, but I hope I get to take a class with you because I can see that you have a practical way to deal with life's ups and downs for highly sensitive people. And again, I believe, and I don't know if you agree with this, but I believe that as this photonic energy hits the earth, I think the first stage of development for humanity is that everyone is going to become empathic. And all of a sudden, people are going to need the tools that you are offering and others like you that have a toolkit for us highly sensitive people that were the early guard, the early wave of it. But I think everybody's future is that because that's our journey to being telepathic.
Yes, yes, well said. And again, my classes are on the website.
Yeah.
And if anybody has any questions, they can contact me. I'd be glad to have a dialogue with them, a conversation with them.
Yes, I put the unitylongmont.org /our spiritual leader on the screen and in the comments, and I'll make sure that if people want to connect with you, Dava, that we'll get you together. And I really appreciate this conversation because I think it's not that hard if we give ourselves permission. That's the other part. A lot of my audience are servant leaders, and
Mm,
they do everything for everyone else. They take care of their employees, they take care of their customers, and so I've kind of taken it upon Conscious Business Zone to bring them resources so they can take care of themselves and find ways to live a happier, more loving life, because I think business is the way we're going to turn this ship around. I really think loving kindness in business and customer service, all of those interactions, if we can really see ourselves as the other, we would change the world.
Beautiful. I really appreciate that you do this service. It's wonderful.
Right. Well, you too. My goodness. Thank you. And thank you for coming in. And again, I want to make sure that everyone understands the opportunity to really you can see how practical Dava's work is, that it could help you, whether you need a mentor, whether you want to take a class. They're all on Zoom. So anywhere around the world, if you speak English, this could be a help to you. And these tools are going to serve you for the rest of your life. They're precious, really. So thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. I learned a lot again. Thank
Thank
you.
you, Kathy. Take care.